Hi, everyone. I'm Phyllis Klein, and this is Poets in Conversation. I'm so happy to be back with you after such a satisfying summer and early fall break. But certainly we need to make space tonight for the terrible new conflict and suffering going on in the Middle East and still going on in Ukraine. Since we are here together, we can listen to great poetry, we can write, we can be together with love and respect for each other during so many harrowing times. Tonight, we have two poetry sisters, Farnaz Fatemi and Lisa Allen Ortiz. Their books, Farnaz's debut and Lisa's second, are firmly rooted in the body, particularly the mouth, tongue, throat, and neck. The poetry goes where it goes, meandering through the world of the stem and the worlds of language and family. These deeply gifted poets ask essential questions about identity. Who am I and who am I not? Who am I if I am missing body parts? And who am I if everything I know grows wings and lands on skin? And many more examples of that. Their reading tonight is a moving tribute to the role of women, what it means to be a woman, a sister, a female patient who is ill, a girl who is silent but not alone. All the possibilities for love and healing. And then there's the use of prose and persona poems to enrich and deepen the work. This reading is also a tribute to their friendship and connection. Aren't we lucky to be a part of it? I want to say thanks to Maria Baglien, who is our tech host tonight. Welcome back, Maria. I'm starting with a poem. This is my body poem about the jaw. It's been a bone of contention, as you'll hear about. For me, it's been a bone of contention in this poem. You'll hear about it in this poem. Relentless. When my mother was alive, she visited me from New York for 2 weeks. After she left, my mouth refused to open. I took my jaw for granted before that. And later, all the mistaken mouth guards didn't help. The dentist with their theories, wrong as my mother's determination to break the bone of my spirit, to prove she was right after all. Last night, alive with aching, I listened to hypnosis for TMJ with an Australian named Michael, telling me my tongue can help my jaw learn how to relax. That my jaw is just as soft as a wet piece of string instead of a hydraulic jackhammer. Michael made me cry with his whispered exultations about how I now move and breathe like a new person. But I wonder how I could be anyone but myself, one who loves to gnaw. You only get one mandible, one maxilla, and mine feels as if they will die tomorrow. They hurt with the ferocity of a jaw of life on a mission to pull me from the wreck of my crumpled face, a sheet of metal damaged with age and sun. This grinding relentless, each torque a memory, a haunting, and a drive to forget. All night eating my way through whatever obstacles I've crashed into now and before. All those 18 childhood years molded into muscles and bones, chained up like whimpering dogs, pleading for release. And now I'm going to introduce Lisa. Lisa Allen Ortiz is the author of STEM, winner of the 2021 Idaho Prize, and Guide to the Exhibit, winner of the 2016 Perugia Press Prize. Her short stories and poems have appeared in Beloit Poetry Journal, the Bennington Review, Catamaran Literary Reader, Colorado Review, and the Literary Review. She is co-translator with Sarah Rivera of The Blinding Star, selected poems of Blanca Varela, which won the 2021 Northern California Book Award for Poetry in Translation. She was born, born a long time ago in the wilds of Northern California, from beautiful wild parents who had beautiful wild times. She now lives in a calm and ordinary life in Santa Cruz. And let me just read a little bit from the back of her book, which I just love this description of the book. I'm just going to paraphrase, take a few sentences. STEM is a book about the body. The body in this book is imagined as a stem. At the center of this book is a florist. She is imagined. Also, she imagines. Throughout this book, there are poems about the neck. The human neck connects the human body to what we call the mind. The author of this book had some trouble with her neck. Inside the neck is the throat, a hollow space where words are formed. Trauma and abuse, experts say, constrict the throat. This book would like to be opened. Lisa.
Hi, Phyllis, thank you. Thanks for that beautiful introduction of just this space and Farnaz and I, and thanks for your poem too. I love the idea of gnawing your way through life so much. Yeah, and it's really fun to be here with Farnaz. This isn't the first time I've gotten to open for Farnaz Fatemi, who is the poet laureate of my town. And I wanted to at some point say a lot of things about her, but because her family's here, her mom and her sister and her favorite cousins, I couldn't say that much, but I'm really looking forward to our conversation. It's really an honor to read with Farnaz and someone as smart and experienced as Phyllis. So thank you, everybody. We were going to braid our poems together, and instead, after Farnaz sent me her set list, I just wanted to hear them all. But my poems do match up. Like I was thinking about her book while I made the choices from what I'm going to read today. So when she reads, I hope you get to hear a little stereo thinking about what it means to be in a body, and in Farnaz's case, what it means to be understood and understand it culturally and in your family. Later, I learned to speak without a tongue. But first, I wrote backwards. First, I learned to breathe without my throat. Once my teeth chattered alphabets and people sat in rows to hear me speak. Later, I wrote on paper and the paper cut itself to emptiness. Later, I sat alone in the pew. Once I chanted into the empty nests of finches. Once a cathedral grew in the meadow, crowns of flowers on the skulls of deer. Before that, I had children. After that, everything I loved became a whole. I lay down and shouted names into the dirt. After that, eyes grew upon my heart, and all those eyes grew hearts, and all those hearts' eyes, and hearts and eyes were trapped inside me in the dark. Later, the children will come back and will swim moonlit in the river. Later, an emptiness will swallow me in whole. After that, I will turn to grass. The next poem is called Sternocleidomastoid. As Phyllis suggested, there are some things that happened to this writer's neck. And one thing is, after I was sick, they just took a whole bunch of stuff out of my body. And one thing that I lost was that muscle that goes right here called the sternocleidomastoid. And it's just weird to know that how much you can live without, as you move through life. You don't really need all the things you came with. You can just roll on through. So this is a weird poem. Hold on. Sternocleidomastoid. If I can live without myself, what else can I live without? Trees, no, breath, but lungs, not. My friend's dad growing up had one lung. I thought about that. My cousin had no kidneys. We're all missing parts, but my question is, when does the missing become all that we are? That crow shrieks from the wire, me with talons. Imagine something called soul cut out of night and pasted on day, foul bird, ghosts, the grass under the feet I still have, dirt under the grass. Thing is, I feel connected to you. No tendon or cervical spine, but I've, whatever, spent time with your body. I've felt your body inside mine, inside your body, inside mine, appendages and crevices, body inside a body, wheel inside the old wheel. Sex is weird, says the crow from his wire. How crows make love, I type in, photo of crows stacked. Will I talk to you when you're dead? Will I visit your grave or some beach where your charred bones lay at rest? Will you be eaten by crows, vile, but everything that falls on the earth becomes earth? You know who you are, and you also know who you are, me. Will I talk to sand? Will you talk to me when I'm sand? Sometimes I go to the gym. People at the gym push their bodies hard on machines, same way I push against you, special you in the night. I hold on with all my might. I want, is wanting all that we hold with our life? Is appetite all that we are? Will I be fed in the end? Will I feed? My friend's dad had one lung, but his mother had two. Together they lived a long time, sharing three. They sat in their house. Same with you and me. We sit and wait for our wife, her two lungs, the wholeness she holds in the hollow she has. We glance at the birds, the balance they make on the way we connect. That photo of you vibrates my pocket, a ping from tower to tower, and I'm between you and me, all of the yous, all of the me's, a neck without itself, an open space, under a floating mind, a speck in the sky, faint as a heated up cloud, a dim knowing, once there were so many birds on so many wires. This is called the self without. The self without its stuff. Skin, for instance, bones, without the chairs and children, without the cat and whether to pet the cat or have a cat at all. Lisa, do you mean soul, an essence, a watcher, a wisecracker? No, says the Lisa in my head. The self I mean without me is without my name and is not a soul exactly because such a soul lasts beyond the self without. A soul lingers all eternity, and the self I speak of can barely stay alive. She's pitiful. My self without within, she's hungry all the time. This self without self aches but doesn't know for what. This not soul self is transparent with desire. It's the mean part of me, inferior, small-minded, the sum divided by the number, obsessive, opinionated, breakable, not naked but natural, cat on the chair in the sun, exposed, squat, daunted. This self without trembles at her ownness, an ownness that is all nowness and no having been then. Glass shop, brass bell, you ring. My self without pretends not to be in. I'm going to read a couple of the Florist poems. The Florist shows up in the middle of this book in prose poems. Why is this florist in this book that's about a neck and about kind of keeping trauma in your body and not letting it out? I don't really know actually what she's doing in here, but she came from just a time when I started thinking, well, I was very self-conscious about writing about myself. My first book is all like trying to avoid myself. And for a while, in a negative way, I started thinking, oh, all I'm doing is just making pretty things. Like I'm just cutting things up. When I'm writing poems, all I'm doing is like cutting things up I find in the world and arranging them like a florist. And then I just started to love that florist and allow her to come to life. And it is funny now that I'm writing a lot of short stories to think of, I just can't figure out characters very well in short stories, like that we make people up. It's an odd problem. Like, why do we make people up, just out of our own experience. We make these other people that appear. So there's a little arc of experience about this florist. And the more I was talking to Farnaz and Phyllis about this earlier, like the more I read the florist poems as they come out of the book, the more I understand them. And I hope you don't find them too hard to get. I mostly write with sound in mind. I really like sound when I write, and I like to trust how the poem arrives. But I totally believe the florist is a real person now. Yeah, she was imagined, but because she also imagines, because she also makes, she became real in a way I can't really understand. Really, that I will defend, even if, since everyone else is on mute, I'll defend the fact that she's still really a real person. This is the first one. The florist says her own name. What? I'm just going to say that I use that. The florist says her own name. What? Or in time, when? Where in her throat is the canal by which she came in? Underbrush, a waspy sound, a forest thrush, its ruptured beak. She makes the making sound. She writes it down. The flower shed. She transforms car lot to coxcomb. She holds inside what can be changed from brush to boutonniere. She's mercy, she's grace. It's a closed system. She writes on the ledger, explains to the banker. The waste blooms and the blooms waste to waste. She has keys and copies of keys. She has the lease. She'll hire a man to etch the name on the glass. She'll type up receipts. She types, it's released. It's only money and time. It's only breath and breakfast, the mashing sound that grinds against her ears. It's all loaned. Her lips are a gate. Her lips rise with some kind of tide, trust by caters to the moon, and inside rooty crags, misty caves, mud streams, pelted beasts she saw or has, the hollows of her nasal cavity, eye sockets, ear canals, the vault of her epiglottis, esophagus, eustachian tube, eye of Venus, radio signals in the dark, stanzas and bitter nickel change until her tongue removes itself and her lips curl, vellum breath, open. She's also kind of her store, I think. I'm going to read one more, unless they're like a whole bunch of like thumbs down. I'm going to read another florist poem. It's even kind of weirder. I'm going to read The Florist Feels Fine About It. The florist feels fine about it. Being, ending, the buying and reselling of calla lilies and chrysanthemums, said blooms appearing later in bins, condolences, weddings, big accounts with wedding planners and the nursing home, a harvest of stems, and each day at the end a laying down. This is how she understands time, bodies on bodies, until it all adds up to an accounting of teeth and bones, artifacts swept clean with special brooms. The florist read in the Times about a mosaic bathroom from a Roman villa found beneath a Spanish farm. The farmer grew rapeseed on top. Canola oil is made from rapeseed, and also people feed rapeseed to cows, then slaughter the cows, cut the cows into shapes, and eat the rapeseed inside the cows. Inside the rapeseed is the Roman villa. Inside the steak or milk, Romans take hot water baths. Inside the filet mignon is an olive tree and a mosaic likeness of the olive tree. Inside the cheese and olive tree are all the women who were raped, women who aborted their own babies by poking sticks inside their bodies, women who bled to death because of this, women who made the dirt that covered up the Roman times. Okay, so I'm gonna, there's a poem in here that doesn't really match, but it is the reason I wrote, I put together this collection in this way is I lost a friend, a woman I grew up with. She took her own life. And so this poem is for her. Her name was Psalm. Psalm Isadora. Psalm. We were big enough to be touched, not by God, but by the men who held God's secrets and who whispered into our ears, stay still, we love you, don't tell a soul. We were that old, darkness was allowed in us. The little girls were not big enough. They had pinafores and buckle shoes. We tended them. We taught them rhyming songs and clapping games. And then we big ones got to go. We left the little ones behind to grow. Imagine I stayed. I stayed to pound my fists against every window of that house. I sing-songed your name. I clapped the pattern that meant, come away now. I stayed and we ran from there, our pinkies crossed, the basement, the apple tree, the valley, the shadow, the hole in the ground, and the green grass grows all around, all around. I'd start. You'd sing along. You'd be here now. And this is called Judith, Beheading Holofernes, about the Caravaggio version of this story, which I think most people know, even though it's been edited out of the Bible. Judith beheading Holofernes. What gore comes up when I type it in? I spread Judith wide between thumb and finger. I'm reflected in screen, afloat over scene. And Caravaggio painted this twice, because we all like a story that ends with some man's hair in the hand of a girl, his lolling, half-open eye. We like her unsullied shirt. We admire the placidity of her dutiful face. I learned from my surgeries that the body is nothing but a gurry of sin, electrified tendons that tug at the pouch of the heart. What did you do? The healer asked when I sat bandaged up on the bed. What did you do to cause your cells to explode? What are you holding on? What are you holding that you need to let go? I couldn't explain. My body was some kind of lock, sold as a block. My head was a knotness tossed in the grass. My head kept dripping blood from its neck. A man called me by name. A man said, wait here. A man said, stay still. How much can one body take? I said, get your hand off my neck. I said, you cut me off in the middle of something I was trying to say. I said, this inhale is heavy like tar on the street. I said, that fury outside is something I birthed. I was not acquiescent, but still. I radiated, I burned. I resisted the takeover of body by body by body. I seduced the cells of myself. I saved the village of myself from the invading horde of myself. I became the glass I saw myself in. I'm my own head, hanging in the gloved fist of my hand. I have a sword in my skirt. I wait outside my own tent and caress what remains of my throat. I'm going to end with two poems that have pop songs in them. But this is called Artemisia Gentileschi, the woman who painted this version of Judith. And it has an epigraph by Beyonce. It says, sometimes I go off. The gaze of the girl in the painting, the gaze of the girl in that story, the gaze of the girl that was you, the gaze of the girl that was me, the mud where they found all the pigment, the way we survive by forgetting, the way we glean by cracking the seed, the way we stem by cutting the head from the body, the field blurred in its passing, the grass charred under the tree, the mud beneath all the grasses, the nothing that was his undoing, the God they worshipped back then. She slays, my daughters sing in the back, she slays. And the last one is called Yeah, and it has an epigraph by Ariana Grande from her song, which I just listened to yesterday and was reminded what a cool song it is. Ariana Grande, God is a Woman. It kind of gets away from her, that song. I don't know if you know it. Yeah is a word she uses in that song. My daughter, 17, is away for the night out with her friends. But when I wake up at 5:30 a.m., the light in her room is on and her clock radio is blasting Ariana Grande, and I feel sad about her ghostly absence and everything that's lost or going to be lost, although at the same time, I feel happy as it's early morning and I like early mornings. And because it's a kicky little song on the clock radio, you love it how I move you. You love it how I touch you. At the same time, my dad is dying up north. He's bedbound and addled and sleeps most of the day, pale and breathing with his mouth wide, astonished looking, like maybe he sees God already. He's been there for months now in a rented hospital bed set up in my sister's childhood room, and my mom spends her days waiting, playing words with friends, and arranging the caregiver schedule. I talk to her most days on the phone and make plans to go up and see him, which sometimes I keep and sometimes I break. You love how I move you. And I think she means desire is really God in that song, which is an interesting point and might be true. Desire drags us through our days, so we want tomorrow, even as tomorrow brings us only closer to death. But we are fools, I guess, made foolish by God, made less happy by our own worshipful wanting. Anyway, all of it seems to disappear when I turn off the music and the light. Even Ariana Grande mutes and shrinks to her space inside the radio. All things diminish. I want coffee, but I know that even when I pour coffee and drink it, I'll want it. I'll keep wanting. Maybe that's why my dad is dying with his mouth open. He can taste the last sips of life on his lips, and he would like someone to pour in a bit more. Or maybe he's trying to think of the right words to explain what he sees from his view at the brink. Or he's gathering an inhale that will exhale to an eternal guffaw, because surely we get the whole joke in the end, that wanting is the same as losing and having the same as letting go. The light off or on, the music blasting, a dream of the past that shakes us awake. How our having is had, the clock radio on, the urn of ashes on a shelf, the suitcase, the calculus, the convenience of God, a swishing sound in our chests. Yeah, it lingers when we're done. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh man, Lisa, there are a few times where I just had to restrain myself from coming on and yelling or saying something like, oh my God, I can't believe this. Farnaz, why don't you join us? I mean, goodness, I love the way you announced to us. I'm a poet who likes sound and rhythm. It's like you. This is who I am as a poet, and I just find that so refreshing. You know that you know who you are and what you like, and then you tell us, and then we really hear it. We hear a lot of other things too in there, but that to me is really. I just like the way you come forward with that.
Yeah, it took a while to realize that about myself and own it. You know, it's an infinite number of ways to write poems. There's an infinite number of voices writing poems, and I love how giving poetry is to allow so many ways to approach it. But I did notice in that last, I don't really write that many narrative poems in that last one about my daughter, and my dad was a narrative poem. They just kind of sneak in, and that's nice too. But I think what is interesting to me about it, or what drove it into being, was probably the sound of Ariana Grande. Yeah, I love that word. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Farnaz, join us.
Yes. Well, it's so great to hear Lisa's poems always, but that is I remember it's like one of those moments where I'm like, Lisa she's so bold about following what comes up, and I think that poem is a really good example of it, because is not a typical poetic word that people would put in their poems and title the poem. So, and Lisa's not afraid to do that. I think that's always been true. and I think the listening isn't just a literal listening to the music, but it's listening to the poem. And I think I have learned a lot about writing from Lisa. And there's certainly like obviously thematic resonances that people will hear when they hear my poems, but I think that Lisa's been a teacher for me from the moment I started writing again as a grown woman. And I like just, it's just so great to actually read together always. But I think that that thing about trusting what is true about both your own, like your own craft, Lisa, and how you write, but also what's showing up to write. I think that's something that you've always known how to do, or you've always trusted yourself to do. Am I right?
Oh, yeah, yes, just trusting what's showing up. I mean, I guess so. Like you do push things away sometimes that you don't want to write about. I was saying you when I mean me, but maybe I mean the great thing about like walking or eating or writing poetry is that you just practice. You get better at walking and eating and writing. Or I don't know if you get better, but you just it's the
you hope to get better. Yeah.
Yeah, but you just keep doing it. Yeah, maybe you get worse, but you just keep doing it. Anyway, why do we have to judge it? You just keep doing it. Yeah. And so the stuff that's going to come up, even if you don't want to write about it today, will come up.
Yeah. Well, so Paul says the line "wanting is the same as having." Wrote that line down. I'm trying to remember which poem that's from, but yeah.
Oh yeah, that's from the last one. Which definitely is true. I think right. Wanting is this. Yeah, I think. We just don't stop wanting, even though we have, which is what drives us.
Yeah, some of your poems, when hearing you read them as opposed to reading them in the book, it feels almost like you're dancing with them. I don't know if anybody's ever mentioned that, but the rhythms are so amazing to me and so varied, and sometimes it's like, just really sharp, and other times it's kind of smooth and
no one's ever.
That's a good way I was thinking a lot today, because earlier in the chat I said that I really appreciate Lisa's humor.
Yes, you did.
How it shows up in poems, but there's such a deep there's grief in these. There's in some of the poems you can't really laugh, but I think what the dance is, I think it's like a bodily engagement with life. And so there's dancing even when it's about grieving, and there's dancing even there's a physical, like, if it's two bodies, if it's Lisa and the body of the poem, or the body of the experience or the feeling that is happening, like that is just an essential act that's going on, whether it's a lighter poem or a darker poem.
Yeah, coming back to the body, right? The embodiment, right, of the poems. Yeah. So how was it for you, Lisa, then not having the audience? I know it's so different when we read. Now we can read in person again, and we're still doing the Zoom, but what's it like for you to read on Zoom?
It's still uncomfortable. Because we are disembodied, I think Zoom's doing things to our heads to see our psyches and our heads in squares. It was uncomfortable, but it's so nice. I really love Farnaz's family, so I can see her two cousins are so beautiful there. So that's really helpful and fresh. So that's but it's fun reading into a void, but also it's kind of suits both of these books in a way to be on Zoom.
Oh, really? Can you say a little more about that?
Just because I think my book is concerned a lot about like where the head is and where the body is and the separation between that, and Farnaz's book is too, and like where community and family start and where self ends. And so here we are all like housed up in our own houses, but still connected. It's just kind of nice to have these two books that are searching for connection, finding it here. Thanks to Phyllis of making this space. That's pretty
Yeah.
neat.
So
Yeah,
Robbie's, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, and I think they're like both books in their own way are thinking about like that contact between, or like being next to things and maybe not knowing how to connect, or wanting the desire of like wanting to cross over both like cultural borders, physical borders, lingual, biological, and the Zoom space is another metaphor for like we're all next to, you can see all these
Interesting. Yeah,
next twos.
really interesting. Yeah, I love that. So Robbie says, how appropriate then to read work about the body in this forum, yeah, when we're sort of disembodied. And Perry says, I love how you write about yourself as the not self. Me too. I find that just so amazing and interesting. Like making yourself up like a character in a book. That's really powerful. Yeah.
I'm super curious, Lisa, because of something you said about characters, is that, do you think you're not making them up? You think they're all there in that slice of pie? Was that slice of pie we were talking before about like everything you have to write from? Do you think characters are just part there to be found?
I have that same question. I cannot figure it out. I made this little project for myself. I've been trying to, I mean, I think a lot of, I was thinking, oh, I've been reading Annie Ernaux since she got the Nobel Prize, you know, and she writes so differently than I do. And so strange, but it's also so interesting. And just how we can, in my own life, not in my writing, because I think my writing is so, I just like using imagination and inventiveness. I like inventing stuff, but in my own life, if I could be completely transparent, by transparent, I mean like just with no guile or nothing made, like can I just be in all cases just exactly where I came from and who I am? Oh, so hard for me. I don't even know who I am and who it's like. I don't know if my slice of the pie, we were, before you all came in, we were talking about like everyone, each of us gets a little slice of pie of experience, and then that's what we make things from. I don't know if I've like just got an extra muddy one or a broken one or something, but I have just a hard time being so clear. But I think we're all so complicated and made up of, like, I can't even really be clear about what happened yesterday, and then that day had a yesterday, all these yesterdays that make us who we are. And I can't remember your question now, but I can think, I think you were saying, can you make, do you believe what you make up, the characters you make up are based on you? And I have in my fiction been trying not to do it, but of course they always come back to you know, it's the project that's close. It's all the stuff that's adjacent to me, even if it's at different levels. Like I try to push some parts of me away, but they're still there. I try to create something and say that it's not me, and it's still there. Yeah,
absolutely right. I think I heard somebody say, you know, even if you try to disguise your writing, if somebody who knows you reads it, they'll still be able to know it's you. It's just really hard to not have your voice be there as much as,
and that's so wonderful.
shows up.
Yeah, considering definitely 100% what I have learned from my experience in my reading and my writing is that we aren't, ourself is an illusion, right? We don't exist, but it's so sweet that our illusions have voices. You know, our illusions still have experience.
Yeah,
so,
I hope I really hope people will be inspired by that. I certainly am. I'd really love to try that out some more. Yeah. So well, let's see. So let me see if there's anything else here. So feeling self-conscious about writing, about writing about oneself, and I think we can certainly talk about that more. Let me, I think what I'm going to do now is introduce Farnaz, and so we can hear from you also. So thank you so much, Lisa. And I will, I'll introduce Farnaz now. Farnaz Fatemi, current poet laureate of Santa Cruz County, is an Iranian-American writer. She's founding member of the Hive Poetry Collective, which presents a weekly radio show and podcast and hosts readings and poetry-related events. And I can really highly recommend that to everyone. Her debut book, Sister Tongue, was published in September of 2022, won the 2021 Stan and Tom Wick Poetry Prize, was selected by Tracy K. Smith, that must have been very exciting, from Kent State University Press, and received a starred review from Publishers Weekly. Her poems and lyric essays have been widely published. She's been artist in residence in many venues. There was so much more that I could say in Farnaz's introduction about all the places she's been published and all the residency venues. She's been honored with grants and fellowships. I'll just leave it there in the interest of time. She is thoroughly enjoying her role as poet laureate. And I did want to just add a little bit from the back of the book. The poems in Sister Tongue explore negative spaces, the distance between twin sisters, between lovers, between Farsi and English, between the poet's upbringing in California and her family in Iran. Language is one of the origins of the poet's displacement and the evidence of her non-belonging. The long lyric essay that makes up the spine of this book plumbs years of wordlessness and a journey of reconciliation, as she asks how her tongue might be a passport to the otherwise inaccessible territories within a self. So ask away.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, this is I'm going to read from the very first poem in the book, and the poem Lisa started with also references tongues. This is a book that it's called Sister Tongue, and I will also read from sections of a very long prose piece that was referred to as the spine of the book, but that's woven throughout the book, and that's called Sister Tongue. But this is another tongue poem. I made most of this up. We're talking about making things up. I name the 8 muscles of my tongue. Agnost. I was slow to understand the phrase, I speak for myself. How to believe what I want to say. Half of my tongue, a late bloomer. The tongue has 8 muscles which move it, 4 for shape, 4 for direction. Diatom. Before I am 5, I have the sounds of 2 alphabets in my mouth. But after I am 5, speaking is exertion. I choose English. My aunt, pinching my cheek, sits sullen in the back of my mouth. My grandmother's loving questions lodge between my canine and molar, a throb. Salt cells. My mother utters lines she believes she needs to, words formed in her lungs at birth. Her life unfurls in sentences, dictation, as told to's. What does she find in translation? Into English and Spanish and German, Italian and Czech. So many tongues. Can she remember herself with just one? Allium. My sister's mouth says more than I do, exhales vivid holler, calls us all to hear. I hear her and forget the taste of my own sorrow. Imagine I'm healed, my suffering surpassed. It was always this way. I don't remember how it happened. My sister's mouth, my answers. Lipid. I might have reminded myself to ask question after question, talked over all the voices who seemed not to listen. If I had known this as a child, I might have ached less for company. I wanted to know things, so I asked. Not everyone felt this way. As cells slough off in the mouth, they leave traces behind to be sopped up or swallowed. I don't change. I will always want to know. Shock. This muscle tells my secrets, if they're told, cupping truth to keep it close, prevent it from being swallowed. It knows, though sometimes it doesn't know it knows, what the limits are to telling. I want to speak in a room where someone might always be yelling how fast to let things out, who to talk to, what danger lies underneath. Brine, the place that remembers things the mind might not have learned. Tart shame of thinking too hard about myself. Metallic swig of betrayal. Like my girlhood fears, it lives unnamed. Still, it spills what it knows. Slack. I learn to taste the truth in secret, give over to mute bliss. What is silent dwells on the names it gives each of its selves, lets them linger to get them right. And this is a different style. I think that was probably the longest one I'm going to read, just so you guys know. Very next poem in the book, Untranslated. In the silence of my girlhood, spoons clattered in glasses of tea. The squeak of the front door closing. I was the child I'd never have. I listened for clues. I spoke without saying a thing. I made sounds to fill the spaces I could see around everyone. My teeth and eyes gleamed, face open, a flower, as if to say to these people, speak, say things I understand. Their untranslated words whoosh by, an autumn gust. Staticky din of English and Farsi with afternoon fruit and cookies, my lips mouthing along with them to pay attention as I wrote their stories in my head, rearranged the letters into meaning. I heard the squished sounds of a heartbeat in a stethoscope, pump and thrum. In the languages of women I could have been, I felt both lonely and contained. We were chadorless, light-skinned. All the women who disappeared into the silence inside me, I pull from the roar of the past. I make introductions, by which I mean I want the foreigner in me to meet the foreigner in me. So obviously that's partly about the actual languages of Farsi and English and navigating between them and not knowing how. And as an adult, I went to Iran. We had been there as children, but then couldn't travel for 25 years or so. And I went back, and at once I'd studied some Farsi, and so to try to speak it there. So some of the prose that I'm reading from is in that context. My muteness. It is like trying to speak while dreaming. In some dreams, I want to yell, which means I know how I feel. I can't say how many times I've wanted to yell in Farsi, but it's not that many. Sometimes I could go far enough in the fantasy that I could understand whole sentences I imagined other people saying, as if I learned this language some deep way when I was very young, and my dreamed up conversations with my aunts and uncles are real. Is that what is happening when I want to speak Farsi to my uncle Mohammed, a man who has lived in the States for over 50 years? After being in Iran, I went to visit, and his accented English engaged my Farsi heart. Something inside me leapt awake. You won't believe me if I say this surprises me, but it does. I was raised to speak English. I was a suburban Southern California kid with a name no one tried to get right. I didn't blame them. The only other Middle Easterner in elementary school was named Shubby Ali. Shubby's family was from Pakistan. He could turn his eyelids inside out. And this is the only mistranslation. The only mistranslation is belonging. There is no word for it in any of my tongues. There are no tongues, so maybe that's my trouble. How to find a word inside a vacuum. The din itself is home, but home was never a hearth, and that explains some things. I belong deep inside my own gut, digesting seeds rained from my ancestors' dreams, where compasses keep spinning, where an avalanche of rare earth blankets any inkling of sun. I belong to my own hungry future, never oriented on the map and never slaked. A lover once looked down the well of my lungs and called me nomad. I shook her off, but she was right about a magnet that keeps moving in the night, stealing off to a different north. Stealing off to a new north, I confound myself as if I were a butterfly resisting pins. When I kneel, I don't think of a God. I think of you, and also you, so long gone now. I'm not telling your stories. I don't invoke you to explain laughter. I have other beloveds nearby I watch to learn how to live, close to the tip of my tongue, like you were. You do not linger out loud. You are not in my mouth. But it's not what you think. Now, like the idiom I'd only heard but never bit into, couldn't have swallowed. You are in my liver. No, you are my liver. That's what I can say when I pray. Jigadaman, my liver, teach me what to do now. And I have a couple poems here, well, throughout the book, but I'm going to read a couple from the book that are really thinking about women in a more collective way. Pleats. Sister, let's fold time back on itself. We can pleat it. We'll push our needle through the fold, find silk pants and ruby thread, pull the Qajar dynasty toward us with our stitch. Loop under to anchor, punch the needle through again, and look for Farooq's poems. We'll add a flourish and move on, hips thickening with the ornament of our history. We'll go back and visit the forced unveiling when our sisters watched their futures arrive, like we do, soak our fabric in the tears of change, how quickly it absorbs. We'll bring them code that needs translation, mini skirts and thigh highs, words on the tongues of our men we need to solve. This pleat can turn under, part of the structure of the dress itself, pinned with a stitch of our hair to show it was us there whenever the unraveling comes. When we reach back into this orphaned future in which we tuck ourselves, we'll pin both sides of the rusari at our chins to free our hands and slip things into our hems. This smartphone, that Excedrin PM, a degree in computer science and math, for what good they do. And from Sister Tongue again, a couple short pieces. I see the woman at the end of the off-ramp in North Tehran, one plastic grocery sack hanging on each wrist and hair tucked in an amber headscarf. She stands on her island of sidewalk as if expecting someone, gazes into each driver, then lets go. Taxi driver says she is working. No one can accuse her of doing anything wrong. She is alone, and she is standing and holding her shopping. Her body leans discreetly towards the road. I twist to see her as long as I can. I live alone for a month in Tehran in my grandmother's apartment. I am determined to navigate a capital city of 17 million, hoping not to stick out, unsure it really matters if I do. When the train pulls into the station, I find my way to the women-only metro car. I'm nervous, sure I'll attract attention. Whatever I do, I will always be the American Iranian who has arranged myself into a long manteau, sleeves pushed down to the wrist for modesty, the top button buttoned over my chest bone, and my head wrapped in a pashmina-like hijab. The one thing I wear, I think, is pretty. I carry something to read, a book that's not in Farsi. I wish it were. I also hold a map, try to keep it hidden. Track the stations as we pass through them. I don't want to miss the one near the Jom'eh market where I'm aimed. I stand for the whole ride. I make way for the older women with their full-length chadors who drag carts for shopping into our car. Out the window, I see young men in short sleeves waiting in a huddle at their stop. I'm trying to reside here, take up the things I've explored before, without depending on family to get me around. I check the map each time the train slows down to stop and strain to understand the names as they are called on the PA. I feel like I'm holding my breath. Yeah. Couple more here. Heretic. When you sang "Your body invented us an alphabet," no one heard it but me. The earth in your eyes is the ink in your words. Each look writes another line. Everything I need to know grows wings and lands on my skin. 1,000 tiny plovers cover the skies and shine like moonlight on us both, turning us into your verses. Last night, each dot and curve of the letters of our alphabet came to rest on my body while I slept, and twined around my hips, pulled their fingers through my hair. I breathed them in, became the song you sang me. You spell the morning prayer uttered by my lips. Syntax of attention at the back of your throat. Each rise in note is your hand on my ribs. You hold me and no one can see. Our unholy wholeness hides. Your name in the nearness says, listen. Sentences of rebellion in the starless night. This last section is the very end of the book. Late April, I'm picking up the phone for the first time to call someone in Farsi. I'm making my first friend here. We go out for Turkish coffee and talk about her life. She tells me it's her fate to not be married. I listen, repeat the word for fate in my head when she says it, think about whether I agree. In the grounds at the end of the coffee, I tell her I see an ear in her cup. Knowing this is what happens when women are done with their coffees, they read them. She says, "Oh, listen to what your mother tells you." I say, "No, listen to what your heart says," piecing together the nouns and the possessive forms correctly. I can hear. She stares hard into the cup, and I can see she is smiling under her hard face. I am trying to share who I am, and she is paying attention. When I'm alone, wherever I am often talking to myself out loud. I figured out that as an adult, it's how I know I'm listening. I mean, in English. One morning in the middle of a month in Iran, I commend myself about my Farsi, and I say it in Farsi. And then I say in English, "See, it's goofball Farsi, but it's yours, and that's how it's going to have to be." I'm looking in the mirror in my grandmother's apartment in Tehran. I have the place to myself. In a couple of years, she will sell it to one of my cousins. She will never be back here. Looking at myself, putting on my headscarf, getting ready to go outside, get a taxi, visit some relatives, I recognize myself. And I recognize the voice I'm using, but it's different. I have things to say in Farsi, things that won't translate, things I can't say any other way.
Thank you so much, Farnaz. Wow. That was a beautiful reading and so melodious. Yeah. Wow. So moving. Yeah. Well, so I'd love to have people, talk and say some things to both Farnaz and Lisa. If you feel like you can, we have a lot we can talk about. Does anybody want to say something?
Oh, I just love the shape of that reading, Farnaz. Like, I love the way you start and ended. I haven't heard you end with that final piece. I love it, and I love it that it starts with the tongue. I just was so moved all the way through. It's just like a distilled version of the book, the poems you chose. I really liked it. I don't know if we have time, but can you talk about Heretic?
I don't know what to say about Heretic.
Yeah, we have time. Yeah, good question.
I mean, I'll say one thing I'll say about that is I really was thinking, one thing I was thinking about was the shape of Farsi letters, the way that I've always thought they look like birds. And but I think what was happening to me when I was in Iran, practicing, meeting people, being there, living there, I was, the language became more animated, and it became more alive, and it became more animate, as something, I actually, Lisa knows this about me. I see words in my head. Like, some people don't see words, but I picture words. So when I'm learning another language, I picture them. And it was really, but I'd done that with French and German. And when I studied Farsi, I was like, oh my God, picturing a different alphabet. And so it's like they're almost separate from me, but somehow Farsi is more internalized. Like, it isn't something I can picture, which I think is a beautiful thing about it, about my relationship to that particular alphabet. But it feels very much more like moving and more like the metaphor that I used of birds landing. So it's partly, in the face of it, to me, that's a love poem to somebody, that like a forbidden love poem, but it's also a love poem to, like, my multiple tongues, and the way that the multiple people that I can be when I'm connected to language. or connected to poems. And probably connected to birds too, you know, now that I think of it. It's an ode to letting myself be all those people. Thank you for asking that. I've never said that before.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful. Well, so Paul has a question in the chat. He says, I'm curious to ask both of you, Farnaz read more narrative poems, Lisa more what might be called lyric. Is there a different feel to words in these different spheres of poetic writing? And that we actually were talking about that as we were preparing too. So it's a great question, and there's a lot we could say. Oh, how do we
feel to the words? I think there is a different feel to the words for some reason. Maybe narrative poems feel more natural, less, don't you think?
Yeah. Well, they feel more natural as language, but then lyric language feels more natural as music.
Huh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, we
I
were
what I mean by natural, actually.
Yeah. What do you mean?
What do I mean? I guess what I mean is that narrative poems feel more like conversation. They have a conversational, that's kind of their reason for being, right? You're telling a story, you're narrating something. I don't know. Someone can Google this, or someone who's smarter can maybe already just naturally knows. But I read one time that some linguists believe that language, I don't know, we've always heard that language came from hunting somehow. We were using language to count deer and explain to people. But other linguists think that language developed from chanting. Like the first thing we did was chant before we had other stuff. And so I think lyric poetry probably comes from the more chanting, its ancestors in chanting.
Interesting. Yeah, well, we were talking also about mystery, and I think there can be mystery in either narrative or lyric, but maybe lyric has a little more in general. I don't know what you would think about that. It's I don't know. It seems to me more compact in a way, and so more can be inferred from the imagination, but that could just be me.
Although they have more in common than they have apart. Really, I really, Charles Simic said something I always believe, especially in hard times like these, that he was like, I don't believe in joining any tribe. I just believe in lyric poetry, because lyric poetry just celebrates the individual, right? The individual story, the individual sound. And I really think about that. If we all just love individuals and celebrate individuals and let everyone have a voice, then that should work.
Yeah. So other questions that people might have?
We have a raised hand.
Oh, we do. Oh, thank you, Myrna. Sorry, I missed it. I was so busy.
That's okay.
About asking a question myself. Yeah, go ahead.
Before we drift away from this topic, and this remark is really for both of you, and for Phyllis, and for anybody else who wants to chime in. I'm very interested. When you write poetry, do you most of the time stick to either lyric or narrative, or do you mix them at will? And if so, what are the constraints? What do you find it liberating to mix the two, or do you find it obstructive and difficult? And the reason I'm asking is that I very often mix the two purposes, so to speak. And so I'm very curious to what you have to say about that.
I'm glad you mix them. Yeah, go mix them, girl.
Yeah, mix them. Yeah, I want us to say that I'm so unaware of what I'm doing when I'm doing it. So I'm not thinking it's narrative or it's lyric when it's coming out. And I remember in the first 1,000 words of this long essay that I wrote that became part of the small poems in this book, Lisa said, "Oh, it's so interesting how what's really working in this is these sentences move back and forth between lyric and narrative." And I was like, "Oh, they do?" and I was so like, "Good, thank you for showing me that." And really not aware, but then of course in revision, it was a useful thing to think about, like that to move back and forth and to allow that to happen, because I think it made the prose stronger. For sure. But I think, yeah, there's some reason that's happening, like when it comes, it's serving some purpose. And I think that's worth just letting that play itself out. But Lisa, you were going to say something.
Oh, I was just looking what Mary Marcia said in the.
Me too. Yeah. What do you think? Mary Marcia said, "I'm thinking how a narrative is open for me talking or responding to someone else, real or imagined, but lyric is more words corresponding towards what it becomes." That's interesting.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Tara, for coming. Should you leave?
Mm. So let me see what else. I'd like to make sure. If anybody else wants to raise your hand, please do. I will notice. So let's see. So Lisa, I heard you, and this is for both of you, that I heard you in another interview say poetry is broken and breaks things. And it's a natural way to break open the self. And I love that. I think it's really worth saying a little bit more about that. And I think, yeah, especially in your poetry, Lisa, it feels like that. It feels like a breaking open. So maybe both of you could say a little more about that, or in the audience too, if people want to respond, just raise your hand. Anything to say, or is it just kind of complete the way I said it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can just finish it by saying, yeah, for me, that's always been the definition of poetry, is just a with line breaks. We use poetry when we're broken to kind of heal something. It's how it's been helpful to always define it. It's funny though, I feel like Farnaz's book might be the exception to that, because I feel like there's something about Sister Tongue that is a part of that's sort of putting stuff back together.
Yes.
Maybe it's that combination of the essay that flows through it, but there's something not so broken. I'm not judging brokenness. Like, I am all for breaking stuff and being broken. Broken, we're beautiful when we're broken. That's totally fine, but it is also nice of Farnaz to put some stuff together.
Yeah. I don't know if this is putting you on the spot, Farnaz, but what would you say?
Well, I guess I was thinking that what I think the book does is acknowledge like more of the porousness of being alive, like of being a self. It's like it allows for multiple selves. I think that's what it taught me. That's what this book taught me, is what was happening was that it's that and maybe that's used to be seen, or maybe in my life I thought of that as a broken thing, as fragments, as things disconnected from each other. And now that it's a different way of thinking about those spaces, that they're actually more overlapping, or they're more like they influence each other, and that I'm always going to be multiple people. That self is multiple to me, and I don't, that's just how I now can imagine being in the world. And so it is probably, there's some reconciliation that's happened because of that, because of the book.
Yeah. So Robbie says it's maybe saying like piecing together fragments to make a self. That's beautiful too, to think about it that way. And speaking of self, I thought we'd talk a little bit about self, not self, because that just is all over both of your books. I some of the lines just completely get to me. Especially, starting with the negatives, like this in the self without. Myself without, within, pitiful, hungry, all the time aches, but doesn't know what for, not soul self. So this whole idea of the self without, within, Lisa, and then Farnaz, you're untranslated, the foreigner in me. I want the foreigner in me to meet the foreigner in me. All the women who disappeared into the silence inside me. Just so interesting and fascinating. So have you thought about it that way, that your books overlap in that way? Or maybe they don't. Maybe that's how I'm seeing it. How do you see it?
I don't know. Yeah, I think you're the first person who's pointed that out, that relationship between them about the self. I mean, they're both interested in how we become who we are. But the not self. Yeah, I think of little Farnaz in those poems where she's the little Farnaz. And how she grew into who she was by connecting herself to other people and her family. And that just seems, like a healing thing. Those connections she makes in there.
It's funny because in light of that topic, I think I noticed all of the yous, all of the me's in Lisa's poem on the Sternocleidomastoid. God, I never say the full word.
I know, me either.
I always just say SEM. So that's all of the yous, all of the me's, a neck without itself, an open space under a floating mind. I mean, that's, of course, that poem is pondering what the self is.
Yes.
A dim knowing.
In a way, I mean, maybe all, you could say all poetry is pondering that in one, either directly or indirectly. I mean, I just love the way you're more direct about it. And play. There's so much play, like you're saying, Farnaz, but Lisa, you just play with that so much. And it's wonderful to have that in there, given the seriousness of a lot of what you're writing about. Yeah. And it's a serious thing to think, who am I, try to break that open.
Very weird. It's so weird that we have a self. If you think about it, it's just strange. I heard this Buddhist guy saying the only reason we have a sense of self is so we don't run into furniture. Like we're all a whole, right? We're some kind of whole God being all together. And then we don't want all our brokenness to run into things. And, like we're just broken parts. We're like are so diluted just so we don't run into the chair. So we have to have all these other things. So I see Perry and your mom, Farnaz, they have their hands up. So so Perry, why don't you go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
When we're talking about the broken, I'm remembering a line from a poem I read a long time ago, and I cannot remember the author. It's somewhere on my computer, but I love the quote. I think about it often. And out of the broken comes the unbroken. Love that quote. And then it made me, while we were talking, Farnaz, I was very taken with your last line. I think you said, correct me if I'm wrong, I say things in Farsi I can't say in any other way. And I thought that was so beautiful, especially because you chose English as your first language, or that language you were raised speaking because you chose it. And and then you go to Iran and your grandmother's apartment, and you ride the metro or whatever it is, and you own your Farsi language. And that makes me think of every time we write a poem, doesn't the language take us to a different self? We discover different selves of ourselves in the process of writing each poem we write. I have a feeling.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I was going to add also the body parts too, that, the mouth, the tongue, the neck, the stem. We didn't really talk much about the stem, and how the stem is connecting the deluded head, the deluded mind to the body. What was the adjective for the body, Lisa?
Oh, desirous, maybe.
The desirous body. Yeah. I mean, so that it's also, all about the self and who am I, and how do my body parts, they're so separated. If you think about a body as just being a summation of parts, but then you put it together and it becomes part of this. It's the self. The mouth is the self and the neck is the self, and yeah, it's it just like so deep. Yeah. So yeah, Fareshte.
This is really not a question, but a request. I mean, are we allowed to request a reading of a poem?
If it's Lisa's, yeah.
Yes, it is Lisa's.
Okay.
Yeah. I love listening to you, as you know, Farnaz,
I know, no.
all the time. And Lisa, what I wanted to say was that, I mean, I've read your poems, but when you read it, it's totally, has a different effect on my body, really. Sometimes I get goosebumps and sometimes I'm laughing. Sometimes I'm just thinking, oh my God, how did she get this sentence, or where did it come from? And the one that I was really taken by was was it grape seed? It was a seed that you go inside it.
Oh, yeah.
And then you cut it and it goes in and in and in and further in. And I had a wonderful feeling, but amazement too. So I wanted to see if I could experience it again. Can you read it again? If it's okay with everyone.
Oh, sure. Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a Florist one. Wow. The Florist doesn't get out much. For SJ, thanks for inviting her.
Oh, she likes being out, yeah.
The Florist feels fine about it. Being, ending, the buying and reselling of calla lilies and chrysanthemums, said blooms appearing later in bins, condolences, weddings, big accounts with wedding planners and the nursing home, a harvest of stems, and each day at the end, a laying down. This is how she understands time, bodies on bodies, until it all adds up to an accounting of teeth and bones, artifacts swept clean with special brooms. The Florist read in the Times about a mosaic bathroom from a Roman villa found beneath a Spanish farm. The farmer grew rapeseed on top. Canola oil is made from rapeseed, and also people feed rapeseed to cows and then slaughter the cows, cut the cows into shapes, and eat the rapeseed inside the cows. Inside the rapeseed is the Roman villa. Inside the steak or milk, Romans take hot water baths. Inside the filet mignon is an olive tree and a mosaic likeness of an olive tree. Inside the cheese and olive tree are all the women who were raped, women who aborted their own babies by poking sticks inside their bodies, women who bled to death because of this, women who made the dirt that covered up the Roman times.
Yeah. Just keeps going inside, more inside, until we get to the women. Right. It's just so intense and beautiful.
Lisa, do you remember writing the series? Were there, first of all, were there a lot more? I can't remember.
Oh,
The Florists.
Yeah, there were some, I don't know if a lot more, maybe twice. Maybe I took out half
Yeah.
were left, and half stayed in, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there was like you opened a channel and let the things
Yeah, it was
come on
really
out.
fun. I know Phyllis is working on persona poems. I wanted to say to Phyllis that I've got a total crush on these persona poems that Lucille Clifton did about David, and I wish I had my book with me. I could. But
Oh, great! Yeah,
they're always fun to write, whether you make them up or take somebody. But Lucille Clifton's David ones she's just like the most gorgeous David from David in the Bible. She just makes him so human. This is a different project than what I was. There's just so many ways to do it.
I was inspired by what you did. Yeah. And with the persona, I'm really just so moved and taken by the originality of both. You know, Farnaz, when you put the prose in there, and I know I heard you talk about that some, that was something that came to you, wasn't the way you started with the book.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just really brings it together in such an amazing way. So I'm just looking at the time and wondering if people, is there energy? Do people have more questions? We can go a little bit late, as long as both of you can stay a little longer. Is that all right? Or we can finish up too. It's
There's no pressure, but just happy to stay if there is anything.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, one thing I was going to say was I just feel like I could spend, a whole day talking with you guys. It just seems very easy, and there's so much there. And that's true of I think all the people I've had on, but but it feels really, that's how it feels right at the moment. So I just want to see where our audience is too, in terms of what your needs are, and if you have anything more that you'd like to say or talk about, or I think we've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything either one of you wants to add as we try to wrap up? Or
I just thank you for the space and the facilitating such an interesting, it's like conversation among all of us, and also among the poems, because I was just curious about how, when a poet is thinking about a reading in a set list, I've been doing it from this book for a few months, and each time is different. And then thinking about doing it in conversation with one of my closest friends, and then a book that's one of my book's closest friends. It's so different, and it's such a special way to think about reading. And I've never read these poems in this sequence. It was very, very particularly thought of when I was thinking about Lisa's book. And then she picked her poems after she got my list, and in conversation with those. And so it was such a unique way to approach a reading. And like really special. You don't usually get to take that time and do that.
Yeah, I love the way you had your process too, where you were going to braid them together, and then you just both decided that didn't really feel exactly right, so so then you came up with this other way of doing it, where they spoke to each other but not in sync back and forth. And I think that worked really, really well. So that
was Lisa's instinct, really, and I think she was right. Lisa was telling me she just does what her older daughter tells her to do, and I just do what Lisa tells me to do. So the universe is like looking out for all of us.
Yeah.
And we should all
Yeah.
do what Phyllis says, I think. Phyllis, I think you run a very, very organized, such an organized and hospitable space. So thank
Oh,
you.
well, thank you for that. Thank you. Yeah, well, so and really I want to thank everybody who's here, who joined us tonight. And we haven't been on, I've been doing this for a while. So so it's really, really lovely to be back and to have everybody with us. Yeah. So I thought I would close with this poem. It's called I Wrote 100 Poems. I wrote 100 poems in the sleepless hours last night, when each moment dented my shoulders with the weight of loss. I knew every word would slip from its air current of brainwave into an invisible grave. I knew fatigue's arms would embrace my neck, would press on eyelids encircled with dusk when darkness broke into light. There are 100 ways to lose a dream, asleep or awake. I have lost them on a sidewalk or a runway, in a field stubbled after harvest. My body, a helicopter in perpetual takeoff and landing, trying for a flight path, a clearing in the fog of dread. Each time someone loses a dream, does it float away into nothing? Is it buried or cremated? Let me find that cemetery where my dreams rest and visit them often, lay down on its soft grass, speak to each hope, each fear as it waits beneath me. If I could, I would resurrect, draw them all their own bird, wear them around my neck. Remember, remember. Thanks, everyone. Yeah.